Welcome to The Explainer. We're jumping right in today because we are looking at a deeply dramatic, gritty, and frankly transformative 11-year period that completely shattered the newly independent Republic of Cyprus. From 1963 to 1974, this small Mediterranean island literally became a crucible of conflict. It tore communities apart and redrew the map in ways that, well, they're still highly visible today. Picture this. It's the very end of 1963. A British officer, Major General Peter Young, is looking down at a map of Nicosia. To try and halt the sudden, terrifying bloodshed happening in the streets right outside his door, he takes out a green chinograph pencil, just a standard grease pencil, and he draws a line right across the city. That single improvised stroke of a green pencil became known as the Green Line. It's wild to think about, isn't it? How one rough mark on a map came to define the physical and psychological landscape of Cyprus for over half a century. So how exactly did a newly independent nation get to that point? Let's trace it back.
Section 1. The Spark of 1963. The Sudden Fracture of a New Republic. Okay, things spiral fast. On December 21, 1963, a late-night police checkpoint in Nicosia's Tatakali district explodes into a deadly shootout. Word spreads like wildfire. By December 23rd, the Greek Cypriot head of police is basically telling the British that the situation is completely out of control. The violence just consumes the capital and bleeds into other districts. By Christmas Day, the fighting hits its peak, most notably with the tragic Kumsal massacre, while Turkish airplanes actually conduct warning flights right over Nicosia, clearly signaling their military readiness. Finally, by December 30th, they managed to agree on a ceasefire in the capital. Now, this rapid, devastating period is remembered by Turkish Cypriots as Bloody Christmas, which they view as a systematic attack on their very existence. On the flip side, Greek Cypriots often view it as a Turkish rebellion or a total collapse of order fueled by a constitutional deadlock. But regardless of the narrative, the facts on the ground were undeniably grim.
Look at the sheer scale of the disruption in the numbers here. The human cost for such a small island in just a matter of months was absolutely staggering. Hundreds of Turkish and Greek Cypriots lost their lives, and so many more just went missing. But pay special attention to that bottom metric, the demographic rupture. Around 25,000 Turkish Cypriots, that was roughly a quarter of their entire population, they were displaced, forced to flee from over 100 different villages, and had to retreat into these small, overcrowded enclaves just to stay alive. The previously integrated map of Cyprus was, quite literally, being pulled apart.
Section 2. Paramilitaries and Segregation. A decade of simmering tension.
To really understand this pressure cooker, we have to look at the paramilitaries operating in the shadows. On one hand, you have EOKA, and later EOKA B. Driven by an ultra-right-wing nationalist ideology, they sought Enosis, the absolute union of Cyprus with Greece. Countering them was the TMT, the Turkish resistance organization. Formed to counter EOKA and supported by the Turkish military, the TMT aggressively pursued Taksim, the partition of the island. These were two heavily armed, highly disciplined organizations, and they basically drove the underground conflict, with their deeply opposing ideological goals turning local, everyday neighborhoods into heavily fortified zones.
For Turkish Cypriots, this era meant profound daily isolation. They were essentially locked into these enclaves that controlled maybe 3 to 5% of the island's territory. Since the state had effectively collapsed for them, the TMT stepped in to fill the void. They set up the preliminary administrative infrastructure for civil life. We're talking temporary courts for justice, makeshift schools, healthcare run by what were known as fighter nurses, food distribution, and of course, heavily manned security checkpoints. It was literally a state within a state, operating day in and day out under constant siege conditions.
Section 3. Drawing the Green Line. The Militarization of a Divided Capital.
You have a tank positioned right outside regular civic buildings. The stark militarization that completely took over everyday streets is incredibly jarring to see. I want you to imagine your own neighborhood, the streets you walk down every single day to get your groceries or coffee, suddenly transforming into a sandbagged combat zone, totally locked down with checkpoints and armed paramilitaries. That was the gritty, terrifying reality on the ground for civilians who were just trying to survive the day.
Of course, the international community had to respond. The UN buffer zone, that green line we mentioned earlier, was formally established as a demilitarized zone. The goal was to physically separate the Greek and Turkish Cypriot populations and halt the bleeding. By March 1964, the United Nations Peacekeeping Force in Cyprus, or UNFCIP, arrived to patrol it. And here's the kicker. What was meant to be a temporary band-aid has turned into one of the longest-running UN missions in world history.
Section 4. The 1974 Escalation.
The pressure cooker explodes.
The pace of the conflict really accelerates here. This incredible rapid-fire sequence of events kicks off on July 15, 1974. The military junta ruling Greece orchestrates a coup d'état right in Cyprus. Their goal? Oust the democratically elected president, Archbishop Makarios, and finally achieve enosis. That exact same day, they install Nikos Samson, an extremist former EOKA member, intending to declare the Hellenic Republic of Cyprus. But this aggressive move immediately triggers a massive countermove. Just 5 days later, on July 20, Turkey launches a colossal military intervention by air and sea. We're talking paratroopers dropping from the sky in amphibious assaults on the beaches. They claim the right to intervene under the 1960 Treaty of Guarantee to prevent Greece from annexing the island.
Now, understanding the completely opposite narratives of this massive military event is absolutely crucial. Turkey's explicitly stated objective for what they called Operation Attila was, quote, to re-establish the constitutional order and to protect the Turkish Cypriot community. They viewed it as a perfectly legal peace operation. On the flip side, Greek Cypriots and the Republic of Cyprus viewed this action strictly as an illegal invasion and a brutal military occupation of their sovereign territory. But no matter what it was called in the history books, the reality for the people on the ground was absolute devastation.
In a matter of mere weeks, the map of Cyprus was radically altered. Turkish military forces advanced and ultimately captured roughly 37% of the island's territory in the north. The Republic of Cyprus, administered by Greek Cypriots, retained control of the remaining 63% in the south. The Green Line was no longer just a partition splitting the capital city of Nicosia. It was now a heavily militarized boundary stretching across the entire breadth of the island.
Section 5. An Island Divided. The Permanent Scars of 1974. 250,000, 250,000 people. That is the approximate total number of Cypriots who became refugees in their own country. Let that sink in. Because of the violence, the overwhelming fear, and the rapidly shifting front lines, 250,000 people were forced to abandon their homes, their businesses, their properties, and even the graves of their ancestors. They fled with whatever they could carry in their arms, completely unsure if they would ever return. And the data we're looking at here brilliantly and tragically illustrates the demographic finality of the conflict. Between 160,000 and 200,000 Greek Cypriots fled from the north down to the south. Simultaneously, roughly 45,000 Turkish Cypriots were uprooted from the south and relocated to the north. What were once hundreds of mixed villages, places where Greek and Turkish Cypriots lived side by side for generations, were irreversibly separated into strictly mono-ethnic zones. The island was physically and demographically severed. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative question to ponder today. How exactly does a society move forward when its geography, its collective memory, and its people remain completely separated by a 180-kilometer scar of barbed wire? The events between 1963 and 1974, they have just history. They are the living, breathing reality of the modern-day Cyprus problem. It's a frozen conflict still waiting for a thaw. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep asking those tough questions, and we'll see you next time.